The holidays are here, and if you are looking for another gingerbread flavored treat, I have the perfect solution for you here. This is a gingerbread oatmeal scone from Amy's Healthy Baking. I haven't tried it yet, but it smells delicious. And I'll let you know by the end of the video how we liked it, but it does smell good. So if you'd like to see how these are made, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today you will be shocked to learn that this recipe is someone else's. This recipe is coming from Amy's Healthy Baking. I've followed her for a while and I've tried a lot of her recipes and they are great. So I was looking around for something else I could squeeze in before Christmas that would still have a holiday flavor. And as you saw from the thumbnail or the description, I went with gingerbread. All month I've been going back and forth between eggnog and gingerbread, and I am ending up on gingerbread just before Christmas. Now these are for gingerbread oatmeal scones. I haven't made them before, but I trust Amy's Healthy Baking, so I'm sure I'll love them. And I am not at the moment changing anything in her recipe. Usually I will try to change something here or there, but I'm leaving it as is. And then perhaps I will see if there might be a change where I can shave a bite or two off. But the bites and points aren't too bad for a scone, especially if it turns out to be a delicious one. So before we start preparing these, let's go over the ingredients. I have here 1/2 cup of quick cooking oats, and you want quick cooking for these, she says, because in the time that they're going to be baking, it's necessary that they be the quick cooking because the regular oats won't be able to absorb enough moisture. So we're sticking with what she suggests and using the quick cooking. But if you don't have quick cooking oats, you can use regular oats. What you would need to do is just pulse them like 8, 9, 10 times in a food processor just quickly, just to get them broken down. You don't want them to become a flour, but you want them to be into little bits, which is what quick cooking oats are. They're just regular oats that have been cut down into smaller pieces to make them cook quicker. Here I have 1/2 cup of non-fat Greek yogurt. Now, this is going to surprise many of you if you've been following this channel at all. These ingredients are cold. I did not bring them to room temperature because when you are baking something like a biscuit or a scone, even a pie crust, something that comes out tender and flaky, you want your ingredients cold, because what happens is when they go into the oven, they are still cold and then they start to melt and soften up, and that's what helps give that flaky texture. So in certain instances, you do want them still cold, and these ingredients are. I have here 1 cup of flour. I'm just using all-purpose flour. She recommended whole wheat or gluten-free, but she does more geared towards like using whole grains and things, so you can obviously do that. I, however, am not. Here I have 1.5 tablespoons of cold unsalted butter, and I have cut it into little cubes, as you can see, because it's going to help us get this incorporated by having them in small pieces. But you also want it cold for the same reason as you want everything else cold, to help give us that flaky, tender texture. Here I have 3 tablespoons of molasses. That is just regular molasses. You do not want blackstrap molasses because that would be far too bitter. Now, one change I may make eventually, I don't know for sure, is I would reduce that down to about 1.5 tablespoons and then use 1.5 tablespoons of brown sugar replacement, which still has a molasses flavor, but doesn't give you all of the bites, points, or calories molasses does. But as I said, we're doing it her way, so that is 3 tablespoons of molasses. Here I have 1/4 cup and 2 teaspoons of almond milk. Now the 1/4 cup is going to go into the batter. The 2 teaspoons is for us to brush on later. That just helps with browning when it's in the oven. Here I have 1½ teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now the baking powder is obviously going to help this to rise, and the salt is there because if you've ever had anything without salt in it, it tends to be a little bland. So that little bit of salt is just going to boost all of the flavors. I have here 1 3/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, and she does say that you can bump that up if you like it even stronger. I haven't tried these at all yet, so I'm going with what she says in the recipe, but she does say that she sometimes bumps it up by a ½ teaspoon or so. I have here 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/8 teaspoon of cloves. Now those spices are typical for gingerbread. If you happen to have my homemade gingerbread spice blend on hand, then you would just swap out all of those ingredients for 2½ teaspoons of the gingerbread spice. And here I have 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and that is all we are going to need. So let me shuffle a few things around and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing that Amy has you do is combine the oats with the wet ingredients. One thing I do question about the recipe is that she has you mix the oats, the yogurt, the molasses, the vanilla, then all the dry ingredients, make a well, put the oats in there, and then mix the almond milk with the oats in the center, and then bring in the flour. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of that is, so that's the one thing I'm not going to do. I'm going to add the 1/4 cup of almond milk in with the oatmeal, so that saves one little step. I'm not going to try to mess around with mixing those without mixing in the flour. Going to add that in now. Amy, if you happen to see this ever, please let me know why you had that in the recipe, because that just strikes me as a little odd that you wouldn't just add the almond milk in now, but it's your recipe. I'm just taking a little detour around that step. So we're going to start by adding in our oats, Greek yogurt, molasses, almond milk, and vanilla. And then just mix that all together. Now you could perhaps, as I said, I'm going by her recipe, but if you've seen my oatmeal breakfast muffins, which come out very tender, it is because I soak regular oatmeal for about 10 minutes in the liquid. So I think you might be able to get away with doing that, but I haven't done that yet in this recipe, so I'm going with her version. But that may be something that I experiment with later. But you just want to mix this all together and get that well combined. So step 1 is done. Actually, in the recipe, that was step 2. The first step is to preheat your oven to 425 and to line a baking sheet with some parchment, and I've already done those, but as far as the recipe that we're combining here, that was kind of like the first step. Now the second step is to combine all of the dry ingredients: flour, ginger, salt, baking powder, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. Whisk all of that together to get that homogeneous. Make sure there are no streaks of spice anywhere in particular that are going to get lumped together and make one piece of the scone really strong and spiced. That's where you want to whisk and combine all of this. Next, we're going to take the little bits of butter and we're going to cut those in. She recommends a pastry cutter. I've never really enjoyed using a pastry cutter because things get stuck in the middle. I'll sometimes use a fork, which is what she also recommends. But honestly, I generally just use my hands. But if you do use your hands, you want to do it quickly so that you're not melting the butter while you're doing it. But you can just use a fork. Just mash that in and get that combined so that the butter gets blended in with the flour. And you just want to do this until the flour resembles small crumbs, kind of like wet sand, they'll sometimes say. But because there's not a lot of butter in this, it's not going to get as sandy. So that's why she probably says fine crumbs. You can see there are little clumps here, like bits of fine crumb in there. So now we are going to take our wet oatmeal and put that in. Now, as I said, this is where she had you put in the oatmeal, but then add the almond milk, or actually she just said non-fat milk. Could be any kind that you want. This is where she had you add that separately and mix these two together. And I just skipped that little step there. And then we're just going to combine this, get that flour worked in to the wet ingredients until we get our dough combined. And the flour will start to absorb a lot of the liquid, so I will flip and press this down into the flour mixture to draw some of that up and make sure I get all of that flour incorporated. And you want to do this until it's just incorporated in there and you don't see any bits of white flour in there anymore. And that looks perfect right there. So now I'm going to set this over here and bring in my baking sheet with the parchment. And we are just going to put this down in the center here. Okay, now using the spatula, you could use your hand, but again, there's the danger of melting the butter a little bit too much. So you just want to press this out into a 3/4 inch high circle. That'll take a little bit of working. And as I've said before, I know that the first part of my pinky here is about 1 inch. So that's the guide that I go by. And I'll just hold it up and see if it's at the right spot. And it almost is. But you just want to keep working at it to get it round and about 3/4 inch tall. All right, so that looks pretty good right there. What we're going to do now is take the 2 teaspoons of almond milk or whatever non-fat milk you're using and just brush the top with it. This, as I said, is going to help give us some browning. And you'll often see on biscuits, on rolls, things like that, that they do put a little bit of milk on the top for that reason. And you can also, if there's any spots that look like they're not sealing together, this is going to help moisten the dough a little bit more, so you can manipulate that a little bit and get around the sides as well. Okay. So that is all set. Now I'm just going to grab my knife, and I did spray it with some cooking spray. This isn't in her recipe, but this dough is a little bit sticky, so I just want to reduce the risk of having any problems. So we are now going to cut this into 8 triangles, but we are not going to separate them. We're going to keep them in the circle. We're not going to pull them apart because they're going to support each other as they're rising in the oven by being next to each other. If you separated them, she said they can tend to dry out. So one cut right down the middle, and then one in the opposite direction to get 4. And then just cut each of those in half to get our 8. And see, because I sprayed it, I didn't have any problem with lifting it off of the dough. I may not have, but why risk it? We've got our scones cut, and you do want to make sure you have a sharp knife so it goes all the way through. As long as they're scored perfectly and you keep them together, it should be fine. Now these are going into the 425-degree oven for about 28 to 31 minutes. That's what she has on her recipe. So I'm going to probably check them at about the 20-minute mark just to see where they are. And if they happen to be getting too brown, I will loosely cover them with some foil, but I don't think that will be a problem. But let me get this into the oven, and I'll see you in about a half an hour. All right, there we have them, fresh out of the oven. And I left them in there the whole 31 minutes, and they will get, as you can see, a very deep brown. The sugars in the molasses help to darken that up, as well as the milk that was put on top. Now, you want to make sure, once you see that color, you press in the center, and if it's firm, it's done. Now we have to let this sit on the sheet pan for about 5 minutes to let it cool slightly, because when anything comes fresh out of the oven, it's a little softer, it doesn't have as much structure, which is why with cakes or cupcakes or anything, you usually have to let them sit in the pan 5 to 10 minutes. Now, Amy recommends sitting these here for about 5 minutes. So while we are waiting for these to cool slightly, let me go over those nutrition facts for you. Now, Amy does on her website, if you go to the bottom of the recipe, it'll have a link saying view nutrition facts and WW points. I often see like smart points, old points, and things like that. And I'm not sure if she's up to date with the current point system, but you will get a rough estimate of what they are. But also you should put anything into your recipe builder because ingredients that you are using may be slightly different. So you always want to put that into the recipe builder. And one thing I did want to mention, if you are on the Healthy app and if you've been having trouble with the recipe builder, because I will be inputting a recipe and it'll suddenly shut down on me and then I have to do it all again, so I have to keep reminding myself to save as I go along, just in case it shuts down. I've been in contact with them numerous times trying to get this sorted. So far, I haven't had much luck, and I'm really kind of disappointed in how they're handling the situation or responding to my issues, but I am still using them, so I can give you the bites and points as usual, as well as the calories and macros, because that is where I get all of that information. Now, doing this as Amy did it, this is coming up at 4 Better Balance Bites or Old Blue Points. I'm on the Healthy Better Balance plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan, and the current point system is around where those are. Now, with that wonky Healthy WW math, if you have 2 of these, it will go to 9 because really you're getting 4.3 or something like that. So then when you go to another one, you go over that 5, it goes up to the next highest number. So if you have 2, it will go up to 9. Also, if you wanted, you could put a little glaze on this. You could use just a little bit of almond milk and even some regular confectioner sugar for a light glaze. But obviously I did not do that. I followed her recipe and it smells delicious. So I really can't wait to try this. Now, if you were following calories, the calories for 1 scone is going to be 130. And if you were following macros, the fat would be 2.7 grams. Saturated fat would be 1.4 grams. Protein would be 3.7 grams. Carbs would be 22.4 grams. Fiber would be 1.1 grams. And sugars would be 5.7 grams for one of these scones. Now, since this is not my recipe, I am going to link to Amy's recipe down in the description box. And I haven't made any changes here, so I'm not going to list any unless I try some later and I think they're good enough to add to the description box. But as of now, I won't add any changes because I didn't make any. Now, it has been about 5 minutes, so I am going to transfer this over to my cooling rack here. Now, I could take the parchment paper and bring that over so it cools that way. However, the heat that is still in there is going to get trapped between the parchment paper and the scones and make the bottom soggy. So it's better if you remove it from the parchment paper. So I'm going to take the whole circle and just bring it on over. And you can see, you can break them up and get them separated. And if you needed to, you could cut it through further with the knife if they weren't breaking apart. But I think these will break apart just fine. Now she recommends that you let them cool completely. She also recommends storing them in an airtight container in the refrigerator for anywhere from 5 to 7 days. She also says that they freeze well, so if you want to freeze some and have them tucked away for another time, you can obviously do so. She also recommends reheating them in the microwave to get them warmed up a little bit, not eating them cold out of the refrigerator. I haven't tried either way yet, so I don't know, but that is her recommendation. I will put right here how we felt about them, because as I said, I haven't tried these before, so I'll let you know here how they were. All right, rather than trying to write something on the screen that you would have to read, I'm going to pop in here with my review of these. They are good. The flavor is good, but they seem more like molasses than gingerbread. So I think I would reduce the molasses by a tablespoon and replace that with a tablespoon of brown sugar replacement. And I would up the spice mix. It was a little too muted in here, and it wasn't just the ginger as she suggested doing. I would probably do maybe a tablespoon of my gingerbread spice mix in place of what she had. Also, one big problem, they burned on the bottom, and I scraped off as much as I could, but the top was perfectly set, and by that time the bottom was burned. So I would probably do them for a bit less time. Maybe I would check them more at 25 minutes and see if they were ready to come out, because the bottom did burn. But otherwise the flavor is good, the texture is nice, but it definitely is more like a molasses scone than a gingerbread scone. I hope that you enjoyed this video and this recipe, and if you did, I'd appreciate the usual like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit that notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. And I am going to link directly to Amy's recipe down in the description box. Also down there I will link to my blog if you're looking for any of my recipes. I do have some cream cheese frostings that I think would be great on these. You may not need it, I don't know. Also down in the description box there is my Amazon storefront, my Built Bar rewards, Fetch rewards, Skinny Syrups code, and my social media. I have my Instagram and 3 Facebook groups that I'm part of. So check out that description box for all sorts of information. So now I'm going to patiently await the cooling process and hope it doesn't take too long. I think a half an hour will do. If not, I may have to go in early. But until next time, bye.